Good day, everybody. This is Michael Aboud with TetherView. Thanks for joining us. We're a little early here. We're going to get started promptly at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. For those of you who are looking to receive CLE credit, after the webinar, you'll receive a form. Please fill that out, and we will provide you with the appropriate form for you to receive your credit within 7 days. It's important to receive the credit that you do respond to the 5 polling questions, and most states do reciprocate the CLE credits from New Jersey. We're happy to help you out if you need some assistance figuring that out. Once again, this is Michael Aboud with TetherView. Look forward to the webinar. We'll get started here shortly. Hi, everybody. This is Mike Aboud again. We're going to get started shortly at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Feel free to ask questions by posing them in the questions section as part of the GoToWebinar interface there. We'll do our best to get to all the questions. We'll probably leave a few minutes at the end to answer any questions that were asked. or raised during the session. If you're looking for CLE credits, you will receive a form within 7 days of the webinar to submit to your bar association. And we are providing New Jersey CLE credits, which are reciprocated by just about every state out there. If you have any questions or any issues with the form, you may contact Jamie Gray at any time after the webinar for some assistance. Again, we're going to be providing 1.2 CLE credits from the state of New Jersey, and we look forward to the webinar. Please ask questions. We'll try our best to get to everyone's questions or concerns. All right, good day, everybody. This is Mike Abood with TetherView. We're pleased to offer this complimentary continuing legal education course. Again, we're going to be recording this webinar. It's available upon request for those of you who would like to get the recording. We will make it available on YouTube as well. So today we're going to be covering the foundation for cybersecurity. We're going to discuss litigation risk, and we're going to review some pretty new compelling issues that have been raised in the past couple of months, specifically the American Bar Association's recent formal opinion. Just to cover some business here, we are going to be offering, again, apologize for the repetition, there's still folks kind of logging in here. We're going to offer 1.2 CLE credits from the state of New Jersey. Jamie Gray will be available to assist you with all those issues. You should have received an email from her as an invite from this. You could just reply to that invite, and we'll do everything we can to help you get those CLE credits appropriately. In order to qualify for the CLE credits, just some more kind of fine print here for those attorneys with us. You do need to respond to the polling questions that will be asked during the webinar in order to qualify for those CLE credits. So we're going to get started here, and again, what we're going to do today is we're going to cover and discuss the foundation for cybersecurity. We're going to talk about litigation risk, and we're going to show you how to do a basic assessment of your cyber risk, discuss the importance in establishing an incident response program, and we're going to also discuss how to handle the avoidance of creating risk when you are responding to an incident or potentially drafting a document. So again, I encourage you to ask questions. We do have material that has to get covered for the CLE portion of this thing, but we do have the liberty of kind of going off course a little bit and asking questions that are relevant to the topic. So please ask questions. We'll try to respond to them as they come up, or certainly at the end of the webinar, we're going to leave a few minutes there for that discussion purpose. So we're going to get started by making a really kind of, for us in the IT world, a very obvious statement. Perfect security does not exist. And no, we're not saying that as a CYA. We're saying it because security is constantly evolving. And if you go into understanding and building your cybersecurity policies with this fundamental understanding that perfect security does not exist and it's evolving, which is the operative term there, you're going to be well ahead of the curve. And so we just start out with some really kind of fun facts. The NSA has been hacked. I'm sure all of you have realized that Equifax has been hacked. The implications of the Equifax hack are going to be far, far reaching. It's going to create litigation in new forms for all the litigators out there. There's going to be several class action lawsuits. I've discussed it with some of my colleagues already in the litigation in the class action field. And it's going to create potentially derivative claims and all sorts of other type of risk. You know, when you think about what's involved in Equifax, you know, if someone's out there and they're going for a mortgage, and all of a sudden, you know, Wells Fargo says there's some false information, they don't get the mortgage because Equifax screwed up. You know, these are some of the claims that we suspect are going to be coming out there, and it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. You know, we knew that a breach of this size was bound to happen, unfortunately. We're not sure exactly the source of the breach yet. There's some rumors out there, but we're going to be watching it closely. And rest assured that everyone here at TetherView, we're always, again, evolving our security and our compliance requirements to kind of stay ahead of the latest challenges and issues with regards to cybersecurity. So your goal cannot be 100% security. It's just not. It's not achievable. It's not practical. Your goal, as per the ABA opinion recently, is to be deploying reasonable efforts to protect your client data if you're an attorney, reasonable efforts to protect your own data, your employees' data, and your customer data. And we're going to get into what that means. You have to understand that you've been hacked already. It's not that you will be hacked already. Many of my contacts in the law enforcement world have said everyone's been hacked. Big, small, big hack, little hack. You've been hacked, your data's been compromised in one way, shape, or form. Our goal is to prevent that, mitigate the risk in the event of a hack, and make sure that you're doing everything humanly possible to deploy the best efforts to get ahead of the curve and to protect your stakeholder data and your stakeholder information. With this in mind, again, we're going to be able to mitigate the risks fairly, and we're going to avoid any real liability in the sense of negligence or issues from a potential breach claim. Make smart choices. You know, unless your resources are unlimited, okay, you have to choose to deploy the techniques to minimize the risk associated to your business. So you have to look at the risk for you personally as a business owner or as a stakeholder or as a counselor to a client, and make sure you're advising, you know, your board and your stakeholders appropriately. Large organizations, of course, they're expected to do more. It's no longer true that large organizations are bigger targets. Data is now supporting the idea that smaller businesses, less than 200 employees, are the more significant targets of more hacks or more attempts, simply because it's easier to get in. They know that a small law firm with 20 or less employees is not likely to be fortifying their data as much as obviously a large law firm, because they don't have the resources, they're not ahead of the curve. So understand that if you're a smaller organization, especially less than 20, less than 200, you are as much of a target as Equifax. Smarter choices, again, they're going to protect you. They're going to provide you better protection from cyber risks. It's also going to support your legal defenses if you're sued or you're investigated. If you are a registered investment advisor, if you report to a regulatory body and you're doing nothing, you're going to be found liable for that breach when it does happen and when it gets exposed. So please consider choices carefully, okay? This is not something you should just kind of, you know, say, hey, I'm going to go to Best Buy, we're going to buy a firewall, we're going to deploy some antivirus, and we're good. This is not just a business decision, it's also a legal decision. So it's important that you understand that decisions you make are going to affect your organization firm-wide. A good policy starts with a great self-assessment. So if you're working with a managed service provider, if you're working with a cybersecurity consultant, you have to be honest with yourself, and you also have to understand the risk of. Excuse us, we're having apparently some audio issues here. Sorry about this, guys. We're just getting a couple of notices, questions that there's an audio issue. Jamie, could you just test it from the phone there?
Hello?
Sorry about that, guys. We had a little audio glitch here on our end. We're going to quickly go over the first couple of slides here, and we'll kind of jump back here. So again, perfect security does not exist. What we're going to do today is cover the foundation for cybersecurity, how to develop the types of policies, documents, and reports that need to be created to effectively manage your cybersecurity program and respond to an incident. We're going to show you how to assess your cyber risk, and assessing the cyber risk is going to be relevant to the size of your organization, the type of data that you hold, and the type of data for your clients. For example, if you're a law firm and you're responsible for SEC filings, I can guarantee you that multiple hackers have found you and sought you out through the public information of an SEC filing, and they have attempted to breach your information. So it's, again, important when you do an assessment and you try to assess your cyber risk that you focus on the risk itself, you analyze the data that you're holding and the value of it, and then, of course, you have to do a cost-benefit analysis. We're going to briefly get into establishing an incident response program that not only shows you how to respond to a breach, but also how to detect a breach. As a lot of my colleagues in law enforcement have said, we've all been hacked. Okay, it's a function of admitting it, and then once you admit it, that's when you can fix the problem. So as you go into this thing, it's really important to be open-minded. It's also important to look for guidance from trusted advisors. 75% of the attendees on this webinar are, in fact, what we consider trusted advisors. You're either attorneys or your managed service providers advising clients on cybersecurity and their risk. So it's important. You have an obligation to your clients to make them aware of the risks associated to cyber. And developing a game plan from beginning to end. It's not just about buying the TetherView solution, let's say, or going out and getting a firewall or some anti-malware software. You have to have a game plan which starts with identifying the risk, how you're going to protect it, incident response plan, and then obviously how do you mitigate the risk in the event of a breach. Again, perfect security does not exist. Okay, everyone's been hacked, including the NSA. The Equifax hack has opened the eyes of a lot of naysayers out there. Equifax, it's an amazing breach. We're going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But there's certainly going to be many different lawsuits, class action suits from the consumers, but also from the businesses that rely on the information from Equifax. So that's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out in the legal world. And what's going to be more interesting is going to be how are the regulators going to handle the situation where another person's information has been breached, but also at Equifax, you know, who's going to get the blame for the situation where there is a breach and then there is actual damages to an end user client or a consumer. With this in mind, you know, with an open mind that you're going to get hacked, that you've been hacked, and the idea that you're likely to get sued because you were hacked, at that point you can start to mitigate your risks and understand the risks. Every good plan really requires you to start making smart choices. Okay, the expectation is that you don't have an endless budget. That's why TetherView was invented, quite frankly. because we understand that small businesses do not have an endless budget. If you're JP Morgan, the expectation is you're going to spend more than if you're a small community bank. Large organizations, again, they're going to be expected to kind of drive the technology and push things forward, but that doesn't mean that if you're a small company, you're off the hook because you got breached and JP Morgan isn't using some sort of tool. It's going to depend on your overall kind of view and opinion and how you handle cyber risk as a whole. So you got to consider these choices carefully. This is not just a business risk decision, it's also a legal decision, and we're going to get into that. For example, if you're writing policies, if you're writing a procedure, you're creating evidence in the event of a breach. Did you weigh your risks appropriately? Did you identify them? Did you train your staff appropriately for the different risks? So every good plan starts with self-assessment, and the self-assessment has to start with your trusted advisor. Everybody on this call is considered a trusted advisor. You're either an attorney or you are a managed service provider providing solutions to your end users and your clients. So it's important that you have these conversations openly with them. They understand the risk, and we're going to get into the specifics about the American Bar Association's recent opinion here shortly. The first thing you have to do is honestly ask the question, do you have a cybersecurity policy? Do you have a legitimate cybersecurity policy? So with that, we're going to start with one of our first polling questions here. How many of you are using multi-factor authentication? Please answer the question. If you are looking for CLE, you do have to answer the 3 out of the 5 polling questions in order to qualify for the CLE credit. Do you understand the risks of not having a policy? Not having a policy, in some cases, might be better than having a bad policy. So it's really, really important that before you go out and create a cybersecurity policy, which is now going to be admissible if you're sued, okay, that you create a good policy and it's appropriate, fit for purpose. So don't just do it to do a CYA type of thing. You have to do it and do it legitimately. And you should engage a professional as you do that. What's preventing you from having that policy? You know, is it because you think you're too small? Is it because you don't have the appropriate staff? Everybody on this call should have a cybersecurity policy, which we're going to get into in a second, but that needs to include being able to identify the risk, being able to stop the risk from happening, and also being able to report to the appropriate people, whether it's your regulator, whether it is your clients. You have to be able to report to them. You have to be able to report to them in a reasonable fashion in a quick enough time. It's going to be argued that Equifax did not respond appropriately, and there's a lot of evidence out there, right? If you look at insider sales of stock over the past 60 days, there has been an uptick in insider sales of Equifax stock. And what's interesting is that happened a couple of weeks before the breach was announced. So I can guarantee you that there's going to be clawbacks and there's going to be lots of liability for Equifax and potential some personal liability for some of those insiders who failed to disclose based on their evidence of selling the shares. Do you have the IT infrastructure that supports cybersecurity, that supports compliance, and that supports your business continuity and disaster recovery? You know, before you go out and try to create a policy, you have to make sure that you've got the IT infrastructure in place to support that, you've got the team in place to support that, and if you're advising your client, because they might be regulated, that you're providing your client with the real, you know, honest opinion and tough love that, hey, your one-man IT team for your 300 employees is not the appropriate team, doesn't have the proper training, and certainly can't respond to an incident or a breach if it were to happen. Again, we strongly encourage the engagement of counsel at the time of a breach. We want to mitigate risk. We want to make sure that you and your clients are responding to the breach properly. And we want to try to maintain some attorney-client privilege as much as possible in the event of a breach to, again, mitigate some of these risks. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to post them. We'll try to get to them as soon as possible. So what kind of lawsuits or investigations can you expect? Certainly shareholder derivative actions. You're going to see that happening in the case of Equifax again. Class actions, again, just kind of using what's in the news today. Equifax is not just going to be a consumer-related class action. There's going to be businesses that rely on the Equifax data that I would consider non-consumer that are going to also create a class action suit against Equifax. Actions by regulators. The regulators are no longer accepting ignorance as an excuse. Everybody knows the risks around cybersecurity. Everyone knows the risks around not having the appropriate policies in place. We don't want you to be a test case for the regulators. They have made examples of some folks, and we're going to discuss some of those specific cases here shortly. And again, causes of actions arising from transactions. If a cyber event, happens, it could impede or impair the value of that transaction. So, a great example is if you're an attorney and you file SEC information on behalf of your client, if you're an accounting firm and you do the same, and that information leaks, that's some significant liability, not just for your client, but for you as well as the person who's been responsible for that information. Again, talking about some of the risks here, RT Jones was one of the first cases that the SEC really went after in 2015. They had a breach that actually occurred in 2013. They had almost no security in place relative to what's standard today. And the SEC went easy on them because after the breach, the SEC found it, unfortunately not RT Jones didn't self-report. They immediately corrected the situation and went above and beyond. I don't think the SEC has that amount of leniency anymore. And again, ignorance is no longer going to be an excuse either for the regulator or for your clients. Failure to adopt written policies and procedures to safeguard information is a big faux pas if you're not doing that. Again, we encourage you to create a good cybersecurity policy versus creating a bad one. We would rather see you with none than one that's not a fit for purpose and say that something's coming up. So it's really, really important that you engage with professionals. If you're a TEDAView client, we will provide you with probably about 80% of what you need from an incident response perspective. But we're not the silver bullet because there's a lot that happens outside of our domain that you have control of, and we'll get into that in a second. The risks are financial, reputational, brand harm, regulatory review, potentially stripping you of your licensing if something were to be egregious enough, and certainly the threat of lawsuits. So how do you mitigate these risks? Well, first of all, you have to identify who are your regulators, if you have any. How big are you, right? I mean, what is the risk associated with a breach? Are you a high-profile target? I can tell you if you're a law firm, if you're an accounting firm, or even if you're a managed service provider here, you're a target because they know that if you're a managed service provider, you have a lot of clients under your domain. If you're an accounting firm, you have a lot of clients and a lot of their data there. And certainly if you're a law firm, you're there. And the hackers are getting very, very smart, starting with socially engineered hacks that just simply, ask you for the information. They fake an email, and they ask one of your employees to send an email out with all their information. Unfortunately, that's happened. We've seen it happen, and that's a result of not training your staff. So it's not just about deploying technology with someone like TEDAView or one of our partners. It's also a holistic approach to mitigating risk with training your staff as one example. The risks of when you are breached, what is that financial, what is a legal risk? It also depends on what your peers are doing, which we'll see based on the ABA opinion. if 99% of your peers are using a technology that is now considered standard in your industry, like multi-factor authentication, it's important that you adopt that same technology and deploy it quickly. Are you able to evolve quickly? Is your infrastructure built so that if a new type of breach comes out, you'll be able to put the defenses in place to handle that? For example, DDoS attacks are getting more sophisticated. A DDoS attack is where a hacker just constantly fires at your firewall and at your IP addresses or your IP ranges, and they just basically try to shut you down just by overall volume because your network and infrastructure can't handle that. Do you have the ability to mitigate that type of risk, and how would you do that? What's the size of a DDoS attack that you could mitigate? And then what are the chances of a DDoS attack? One of the most important parts to mitigating risk, in my opinion, is reporting, auditing, and assessment. The one thing I'll add to this line here is also your written policies. So the most important part about mitigating risk is being able to identify the breach, identify what was breached, being able to assess that damage, and then adapting to protect yourself. And of course, the question is going to come, did you do everything that was reasonable to protect you ahead of that breach? You know, is it old technology? So that brings us to the ABA opinion, which was issued in May of this year. And in my opinion, this is a really interesting way to attack a cybersecurity policy. So as opposed to HIPAA or any of the other regulatory bodies, the ABA did not publish a series of techniques to protect your data specifically. What they said was, verbatim, you have to use reasonable effort to protect your data. And again, a lawyer shall make reasonable efforts to prevent the inadvertent or unauthorized disclosure or unauthorized access to information relating to the representation of a client. What does that mean? Well, the way we interpret it here at TetherView, again, that means that if there is the likelihood of you getting hacked or breached, you need to deploy technology in place and policies and techniques. It's not just about technology, but techniques in place to safeguard your client data. And again, reasonable effort. I'm sure all the attorneys on the phone would love to have this debate. What does that mean? You know, what are the factors to consider? Well, the sensitivity of the information, again, the likelihood of disclosure if the safeguards are not employed. What's the cost of employing additional safeguards? You know, if it's cost prohibitive and it could put you out of business, you know, I'm sure there's going to be a debate there whether or not you should handle it in a different way and maybe not keep that information electronically if at all possible. How hard is it to deploy these safeguards? You know, if someone comes up with a new technique to breach your data yesterday, I don't think the expectation is that you're going to be able to deploy that tomorrow, but the idea is that you're at least aware of that, especially if it's something that's specific to the type of data or the type of information that you're protecting. And then, of course, if you're working with your client, you have to make sure that you're giving them the ability to access your work product effectively without making it excessively difficult for them to access it. So again, if you're representing, let's say, a hearing impaired client, you have to be able to communicate with them effectively in order to provide them with the appropriate representation. The idea is the same. If you know that your client is not tech savvy and you're asking him to use increasingly more difficult technology to access your work product, it's probably going to create some issue for you potentially. Again, understand the nature of the threat, sensitivity and risk. Understand how client confidential information is transmitted and where it's stored. It's important that when you provide the client's information, it's not just the responsibility of the IT department, is what the ABA is saying. So these are quotes exactly from the ABA opinion here. And what they're saying here is it's the ultimate responsibility of the lawyer, not the IT department, for the client data. So if you know that your IT department is using a product like Dropbox to store data, you better make sure that that information that's on Dropbox is not sensitive information, because any place where anybody who has one of those public cloud type file sharing techniques, anyone who has access to it can put that information on any device, and you have no control as to where those devices are, and you really have no ability to wipe those devices if they're not a law firm issued device. And determine how electronic information about client matters should be protected, right? If it's a highly sensitive document, or you're doing some litigation analysis, data review, there's a lot of technology out there to protect that data. So you want to make sure that you're applying the appropriate amount of technology, not overusing technology. But what's really important here is you want to understand those third-party risks, as I described earlier. Is that data everywhere once you share it with the folks there? I'm going to shoot out one more polling question here, if you would. Does your organization have a chief information security officer or a compliance officer relative to cybersecurity? Just a question we'd like to discuss and understand. If the answer is no, you have to understand that someone needs to take responsibility for compliance. So if there isn't a named chief information security officer, who is the partner in charge of making sure that the cybersecurity policies are out there? And if you don't have one, are you using a third party to help you build those policies and procedures? What are the reporting requirements in the event of a breach? So most states today have a reporting requirement. You have to notify clients of a suspected breach. You have to provide them with the background and source of the breach. What are the mitigation steps that you're going to do to stop the data from bleeding, so to speak? And what are the corrective measures that you've done to prevent a breach from happening again? These are all things you have to consider when you do a report of an event. How do you respond? What's the incident response that's required? So again, you want to assess it, you want to contain it, repair, notify. When are you going to get the regulators involved? When do you get the authorities involved? We're going to get into detail of that here shortly. These are all questions that you need to be able to address quickly. And if you're waiting for the moment of a breach to address these concerns, you're creating liability for yourself, because it is now standard practice to have an incident response team. From a reporting requirement, do you have the ability to audit your data? Here's an example of a service that's included for free with TetherView. We audit all server activity. We actually audit a lot more than just server activity. So, for example, if you're a HIPAA compliant in business, we're going to provide you with a monthly assessment report based around HIPAA. There's several hundred items that HIPAA suggests that you audit and monitor and report on. And we're going to provide you that report monthly. That's way above and beyond what HIPAA requires. And the reason we do it monthly is that it allows us to keep a log, so that if you are breached, if something were to happen, it's evidence that you have deployed a best practice to protect your data. So by keeping a monthly log of your server activity, by keeping a monthly log of your audit reports, you're able to walk into a regulator's office, you're able to talk to your clients with a truthful answer and the evidence to support that you've done everything reasonably, possible to protect their data. And an audit report is going to be that evidence. So this report specifically shows file server activity. So if someone were to delete a file, we would know who did it, when they did it, and where they were when they did it. Not only that, we would also be able to see where they moved it to. Another little piece of information that's not really on this report. So that brings us to how do we mitigate cyber risks? First and foremost, you have to understand that the risk is constantly evolving. These threats are in new shapes and forms. Literally every day, we hear about a new technique that a hacker is using to get to your data and your information. And you have to be able to evolve your defenses to get there. But as I said earlier, it's not just about the technology. You know, TetherView is gonna firm you up probably about 80, maybe 90% of the way, especially if you're a smaller organization. But it's beyond what TetherView and your managed service provider and your IT team can do. You have to train your people. So it's important that, you know, if you're a TetherView client, if you're working with one of our partners who are here with us on the call today, if you're working with us, let us provide you with the information and the resources to prevent some of the social media hacks. Ask us the questions. We're certainly going to pose them to you. Take advantage of it. A lot of the stuff that we offer you are things that you could do over a lunch very quickly. So you have to train your people. I'll give you an example of a hack that happened to one of our clients last year. The owner of the business went on vacation and posted some pictures on Facebook. This was completely normal thing to do, right? You go on Facebook, you go on vacation, you post on Facebook that you're there, really cool pictures, you're in the island somewhere. The hacker was watching this client for quite some time, I guess. Then the hacker spoofed her email address, the owner's email address, and came up with a email that looked very similar to the owner's email address. And then they went on to LinkedIn and looked up who the CFO of the business was. And there wasn't a CFO, there was a controller. And what they did was they emailed from this fake email that looked like a company email address and said, hey, send me the company's W-2 forms for all the employees. And it was right around tax season. So these hackers are smart. They're not just trying to get in through your infrastructure. They're going to try all different ways to get at you. And unfortunately, the employee did. And the only thing that tipped off the employee that the information was sent to a wrong email address was 15 minutes later, a ransom note came, literally. And the ransom note said, wire $15,000, you know, to this specific bank account, or send Bitcoin. I don't recall what it was. And at that point, they unplugged the computer, just out of kind of natural instinct, I guess. But the reality was that was a socially engineered breach, and that's how they happen. They watch your activity on social websites. They don't do these are not very sophisticated hacks. It's a trial by number type situation. The idea is that they can automate these with software out there that kind of watches for posts for people that are in the Bahamas, and then it kind of goes back to their LinkedIn page or their Facebook and sees if they're CEO, so on and so forth. So the only way that we could have prevented this hack was to train the employees what to do here, you know, and things to watch out for. And of course, you know, we assisted the client and provided them with some training on some of the things there. Other basics are, you know, one of my favorite phrases in this kind of space is passwords are like underwear. Change them often and don't leave them lying around. In fact, if you're in my office, you'll see a magnet on the back of my door that says the same thing. You know, it's silly, but we say it and you realize it and you think about it. You have to change your passwords frequently. If you're a TetherView client, you're going to get prompted to do it within so many days. And you might gripe about it, but we're doing these types of things for your protection. These types of solutions are built in with TetherView. These types of solutions are going to be built in if you have the appropriate managed service provider working with you, managing your environment. Get professional help to design your network and infrastructure, to respond to an event, and to train your team. You know, at TetherView, if a client asks for it, we will work with our partners, our managed service providers, to provide you with some of the basic information. But it's also important that you assess the risk associated with your specific business, your industry, and every industry has different risks. And so you want to identify the risks and you want to identify your priorities kind of all within the same situation here. Real quick question, we have to just ask another polling question here. Does your organization use Dropbox or a similar file sharing tool? Just interesting to see how this one plays out. So we still have folks coming in with some answers. We'll give it a second, but it looks like it's going to be about a 50-50 mix. About a year ago, it was about 100% of our clients. So we have about 50-50 answer there of folks that are using Dropbox. If you're using Dropbox, we strongly encourage you to consider what information you're putting there, okay? If you're using any other type of public cloud, understand that all the information that you put up there cannot be manipulated there. So for instance, if you're using Dropbox and you have a Word file there, you've got to download the Word file to edit it, and that Word file now sits everywhere on every device from everybody's computer that had it. You know, I was talking to a small organization this morning, and they have 25 employees, and they use Dropbox. And the average is that every single person has 3 devices. But not only that, they share Dropbox files with their clients. So you take that and you look at that, just the 3 times the 25 employees, that's 75 devices that carry that information. You multiply that by the number of clients, you're talking about hundreds, if not 1,000+ devices that have your sensitive information on it. So you want to make sure that, you know, what are you putting out there? Is there any risk of liability there? Is it going to be, is it IP? Are you putting out plans for your latest design? Are you putting out patent information ahead of it? Is there SEC filing information that's going out on these types of file sharing tools? You know, they're great tools, but you also want to make sure that they're used appropriately. With TetherView, the way we address that is that the information that's within TetherView never actually leaves our data center. So right now we're doing this web presentation from my virtual desktop. I've got access to data. If the other employees and the other people in the organization access that data from the virtual desktop, it will never be downloaded locally to their device. So we can really, really control data and say, hey, the data in this specific directory will never leave, cannot be emailed, can't be pushed to a USB device, so on and so forth. We can very, very much, you know, lock down the information on a person by person, file by file, or directory by directory basis. So identify priorities, right? Is performance an issue? Is security? Is compliance? Is the management of your end user experience important? Do you need to enable mobilization? How important is it for your employees to be as effective from any location as they are from their office? The answer for most organizations is the expectation is that I can work as efficiently from home as I do from the office. Especially as you get into professional organizations, you'd be amazed at how many of my associates who are part of some pretty prestigious law firms, they're using products like Citrix, they're using products that they've self-deployed like VMware, which we use, and they're not as efficient from home as they are from their office. So on the mobility question, this kind of ties into it. Does your organization have a business continuity or disaster recovery plan? We have 2 more questions after this. But does your organization have business continuity, which means you can work from any place, anywhere, any time, regardless of what happens to your home office, regardless of what happens to your internet connection, and regardless of what happens to an endpoint. I'm gonna post these results here in a second because it's really interesting what's coming up. And then the other question is, what's the importance of scalability here? I'm going to close that in about 10 seconds there. So if you haven't answered the question, please do. What's the importance of scalability? Can you add users quickly? Can you onboard an employee within minutes, if not, if within the day, if not minutes. We have one client that brought us on because in the event that an employee lost a computer, it would take them up to 2 weeks to onboard a new employee. I'm just sharing you the results of this last poll. 11% of the folks on the call are, say they have business continuity. 22% have disaster recovery. 44% are both. 22% of you have none. It's a new statistic. It's great. It's really important that you don't depend on the ability to recover at the time of a disaster. For example, if unfortunately you were impacted by a hurricane recently, the last thing you need to do is worry about, getting your servers back up and then restoring the data to them. So disaster recovery and business continuity are two very, very different things. Being non-disruptive when you deploy new technology, that's something you have to consider, as a priority as you move on here, and as you decide what it is you want to put out there for technology. So things to do, things to consider, as you're moving forward, as you're building your cybersecurity plan. Good password hygiene, really basic. Everybody says it, but I can't tell you enough how important that is. Again, we're your IT team, your partners, your trusted advisors, like a TetherView, we'll be pushing you to keep changing your hygiene. Something other basic, limiting access. We have a couple of very large clients that have several hundred users with us. And what we've done for them is we've limited access to certain employees by location, by time of day, and by specific function. So not everybody needs access to the crown jewels. So if you have sensitive data, your call center folks might not need information, probably don't need access to that. Make sure they don't have access to that. Test it. You'd be amazed at how often people don't test access rights. Even though we deploy them as professionals, you'd be surprised at how often they don't test it. Geofencing, it's a built-in solution with TetherView. So what is geofencing? Geofencing, again, allows us to say that a user can access their environment from a specific location. By default, unfortunately, if you're a TetherView client, you will not be able to access your virtual desktop from China or Russia unless you tell us that you want to be there. So we can blacklist or whitelist any location. We can do it down to a user level. We can do it down by user group, and we can also do it by specific geography or office. So take advantage of these technologies that are built into the TetherView solution. All of our clients have access to that. It's free. We don't charge for it. And you want to make sure you deploy that and update it relevant to you. As much as we're going to say, hey, we're going to blacklist Russia and China, if you don't need South America there, it's part of our process. We're gonna do a little deep dive, but let us know and let us make sure that we're not impeding productivity for security as well. Training, it's just about basic awareness. You don't really need to do an extensive training on a quarterly or monthly basis. We think extensive training for cybersecurity should be limited to once a year for most folks, but there should be kind of just a brief mention of it. Whether it's just an email, a phone call, a company-wide broadcast, something that just kind of makes everybody aware of it and says, hey, you know what, I'm going to change my password. Or you know what, I don't need to, I want to send in a ticket and lock access for my desktop from everywhere except for Minnesota or wherever it might be. Policies and procedures. This is not as basic, but some of the policies are really basic, and you want to start putting those policies out there, right? Not just password protection, but email policies. What do you want your employees not to email? A basic policy like a clean desk policy. If you're a new TetherView employee, part of your manual that you sign, there's a clean desk policy. And what that says is at the end of the day, your desk is going to be clean of all sensitive information, or you're going to be in a locked office, or else you could be subject to, a discussion and reprimand. Basic policies like that, you put it out there, you'd be amazed at how quickly people get, Post-its off of their desktops and things like that. More advanced things to do, wargaming and planning. This is kind of left over from one of my associates that we did the last webinar with over at Skadden, Michael Richter. He used to do wargaming and planning for, high-level contractors. And it sounds silly, but, spend 10 minutes and have a war game with yourself. Who would want access to my data? Do you have, corporate espionage issues where maybe there's some new employees or some former employees, that would want access to their sales lists or their templated documents? Do you have everything in place to prevent that from happening? What are you doing when an employee leaves? Just by saying it out loud, wargaming isn't necessarily some elaborate, conversation, but, the basics just start coming out when you have this thing. And cyber threat intelligence, a little more advanced again, but, understand, do a little Google search. There's a lot of free resources from the FBI, from the NSA, from various different government entities that you can search on a industry by industry specific basis to understand what's the threat to your specific organization. And again, repetition is essential. We're not saying you have to do this monthly, a very, very elaborate, process. But we kind of suggest just having the conversation softly. Put a funny sticker at the water cooler, something basic like that. Have the conversation with your clients, and understand and let them know that there is a potential risk associated with the type of data that they have. So what are the challenges of building, IT infrastructure, and protecting it? Well, if you're using, current day technology, not TetherView, but if you're using technology where you're relying on a laptop, you're relying on a server, you're relying on specific devices, it's really hard to protect your environment. And that's one of the fundamental basics about TetherView, is that our secret sauce is that we don't have to protect all these endpoints out there. Our secret sauce is that by using our virtual desktops, we only have to protect our data center. And there's really only one way in and one way out. But when you're using a laptop that you say, all right, it's encrypted and there's a VPN there, okay, the data still sits on that laptop and that data is still exposable. But not only is the data exposable, it's also really hard to protect it, because now you have 1,000 laptops running around, and now your IT team has to worry about these laptops and conflicting software from the encryption tool to the antivirus tool, and you'll be amazed at how often these things create issues. But make it easy for your IT team. By using a technology like TetherView and a virtual desktop, we don't care where you access your data from. We don't care what device it's at. The data never leaves the data center. The concept is that anybody can build a perfectly secure, airtight environment. Just unplug it from the internet and don't let anybody use it, right? If you saw the Mission Impossible movie with Tom Cruise, that was basically a Tier 4 data center. The only way in was through a top secret room, and it had no connectivity to any network, and it basically sat there all on its own. Doesn't do anybody any good. And the idea is that the technology that TetherView has deployed allows you to access your data everywhere as efficiently as if you're sitting in your office from any device, any place, anywhere, anytime. The value of data, this is a little old. I think the prices have gone down for some and up for others. It's going to be interesting what the dark web prices for Social Security numbers are now that the supply has peaked with the Equifax hack. But as of 6 months ago, a Social Security number with a name and an address was worth $1. And you could buy anybody's Social Security number for $1. Think about that. If you had a nefarious actor out there, who wanted to do something bad, they could simply get to the dark web, pay somebody $1, literally, and get their social security number and just create havoc for them. A DDoS attack. You can shut down just about any website out there for $7 an hour today. They're out there. We've seen them. But basically, for $7 an hour, you can pay these bad actors to shut down anybody's website out there. Medical records are worth $50 and up per record. Just some quick information, just really interesting there. One of the most interesting numbers here is the mobile malware. I haven't seen personally ones that work incredibly well, but apparently for $150 you can pay folks to basically hack anybody's phone, get all their emails, overhear their conversations, look at their camera remotely, and basically be where they are every moment of every day. What's the cost of these? What's the cost of this of a breach? Well, the average cost, based on today's numbers, we think the number's going down just based on the size of the folks that are getting hacked. The average cost of a breach for a mid-sized business is $3 to $4 million per breach, if you put that out there. So again, how do you mitigate the risk here? The answer is being reasonable is key. You have to consider the risks. You have to consider the the value of your data, and you have to consider the likelihood of the breach. But being reasonable is going to mitigate your risk in the event of a lawsuit. So you just got sued. The most breach cases lose here because they can't show damages, right? It's true. This is a real fact, okay? And so you want to be able to show that, hey, I got breached, but if you have the audit information, if you have the data to back up that the breach happened and this is how we mitigated it, this is what happened, you're going to be able to get past that motion to dismiss and basically throw the case out. Additionally, as what we're saying here on the slide, damages are hard to show. What is the real damage for the breach? It depends. If it's an SEC case, the damages are a lot more tangible. So again, the reasonable factor is going to be based on who you are, where you are, who your client is. Of course, like any case, the most expensive part of any legal case is the discovery. How do you mitigate that cost of discovery? By having the tools necessary, like an audit tool, like an assessment tool, like your cybersecurity policies published ahead of time, and you're not doing it reactively, you're doing it proactively. If you have that, your discovery process is going to be minimized because you're basically going to hand them 12 months, 14 months, 18 months worth of audit tools, out there. So again, when we consider reasonableness, it's changing over time. You cannot be expected to deploy technology, set it and forget it for even a year today. If you buy technology with regards to cybersecurity and you're not touching it on a regular basis, you're going to create exposure. And that is now the norm. So if you're not constantly maintaining firmware updates on your firewalls, you're not deploying the proper patches. Of course, patches are going to be deployed on a proper schedule, but in the event that a serious patch is identified as a vulnerability in an operating system, you have to have the ability to identify that quickly and deploy quickly. And again, with TetherView and our partners by your side, you're able to do that. We can't stress this enough. Effective cybersecurity starts with proven and audited methodologies. The fewer devices that hold and retain your data, the lower your risk. Okay, it's really, really simple. If you can minimize the number of devices or things that you have to protect, it's going to be easier to protect it. It's going to be cheaper to protect it, and it's certainly going to be less likely that it gets breached. Keep in mind, with TetherView, your data never leaves the data center. Everything you do happens behind our firewall. You're never downloading information locally. You're using our internet to browse the internet. You're using our internet to download that client file. So keep that in mind. Multi-factor authentication, you know, it's amazing that not all of our clients are using it because we provide it for free. They just feel it impedes their ability to log in. But this is such basic technology today. You need to have it to access your virtual desktop. You should be using it for accessing anything. So if you're a client of ours, we give it to you for free. It's constantly evolving. You can use multi-factor by getting a text message, a push notification to your phone, or even a phone call. Separation and control of the data. You have to separate the crown jewels from, you know, everything else. Understand and know your data. Know where the data is. Know the importance of each piece of data, and really control who has access to it, where it resides, and test it. You know, don't just take our word for it. We test it when we hand it over to you, but make sure that no one can move things around nefariously. No one can move it by accident. And if someone moves a file, it can show up someplace and you notice it, not just when you need it. We get those calls all the time. Hey, a file disappeared. We go to our logs and we can tell you that, you know, Sally moved it into another file by accident. It'll pop up a notification if we set it up. Basic tools like that, again, built in with TetherView. You have to be able to add and remove users quickly. So if you think about it, when you deploy devices, just because you remove the user, can you get that information back? What happens if they lose the device? Questions you need to ask yourself. Basic tools that are built in, again, to TetherView solution that allow you to rest assured that if an employee, something were to happen, you don't have to worry about the data that's out there. You have to consider business continuity versus disaster recovery. I'm going to quickly go over that, but you know, I understand the difference of that and the importance of that. We're just going to put out our last polling question, and then we'll continue for a couple minutes after this if you guys want to stay on. I don't want to keep anyone who's looking for the credits. But the last polling question is, would your organization be interested in a complimentary security assessment? So through our managed service providers, we are offering a complimentary security assessment. And regardless of the size, you'll get a free complimentary security assessment. That's going to be a real security assessment. So if you're interested, please answer yes. An appropriate partner will reach out to you. One of our service providers will reach out to you to provide you with that security assessment. So if you're interested, please say yes, and we'll get back to you shortly. We're going to keep going just for a few minutes. If you have questions, please pose them. I'm gonna wrap this up in probably a couple of minutes. Again, I apologize for running a little long here just because of the audio glitch earlier. But a couple of cool things that are coming up you might want to stick around for. So what are your practice goals and objectives? You want to identify real risks. We talked about this. You got to protect what matters most. You have to sustain your security program. What does that mean? Just because you get it right today, it's always evolving. Know the weaknesses, address them today, but understand that they're evolving and have a process in place to adapt to those processes. With TetherView, with our managed service provider partners, this is our business. It's built into our solution. You can sleep at night not worried that you've got exposure with your firewall. Enable security in the business. Make sure that everyone understands that security is everyone's responsibility. It's not just an IT problem. It's a business problem. If you're an attorney and you are just depending on your IT team to provide you the tools, understand that the Bar Association just published an opinion that says that's no longer acceptable. So you will be held responsible if you put your client's data out there, they get breached, you're going to be held responsible. So make sure you understand. Challenge your IT team. Challenge your managed service provider. Challenge TetherView if you're a TetherView client. We happily, if you're a client, we're happy to show you around the environment, show you the tools that we're deploying, We don't necessarily publish everything that we're doing for obvious reasons, but if you're a client and we have the appropriate documents in place, we're happy to show you some of the things that are coming up technology-wise and some of these tools that we use to evolve our security programs. Real quick, the controls and standards out there, the way the industry is going, the way every regulator is going, is everyone is starting to look at NIST. NIST is evolving as well, but the TeleView solution is based on the NIST framework. And what NIST did was they were really the first, they copied off of the European Union, which was ISO 27001. But ISO 27001 and NIST are essentially the same document. The framework is the same. It provides the controls and standards necessary to protect the client's environment. If you're working with the DoD, if you happen to be an ITAR regulated client, the NIST framework is the guidance for ITAR compliance. So if you are handling sensitive information for classified information for the government, if you're handling sensitive information for a bank, TeleView treats your data the same. There's no my mama told me I was special too kind of syndrome here. We treat all our clients the same. All of our kids are treated with the same love and affection, as they say. You have to be able to audit your data. You have to be able to go back and provide an audit and reports to prove that your data was protected. Just because you're using a firewall or you're using some standard tools, if you have no way of auditing what touched your data, how it happened, intrusion protection services logs, it's going to be hard to prove that you weren't breached or that you've done everything possible to protect your client data. Basic tools, if you're not a TeleView client, you need to ask the question: what type of encryption are we using here? Is the data encrypted at rest? Is the data encrypted in transit? Are we able to isolate the data from folks that don't need access to everything? Are we able to see who touched the data when and where it went? That chain of custody is mission critical in the event of a breach, in the event of a situation. Again, back to operational issues here. You want to discuss the operational controls with the entire team. You want to make sure that everyone in the organization knows they should not be emailing PII to anyone that's not encrypted, that's not using an email encryption tool. If there's a social security number, is your system able to identify when someone's trying to send out a social security number or some sort of information? And of course, a lot of those tools are built into the TeleView solution here. And things like a DDoS attack. Can you mitigate the DDoS attack? What's the size of it? What would you do to discourage that from happening? And how would you react to that in the future? Professional intervention. So when should a client engage with counsel to conduct assessments under attorney-client privilege? It's a tough question. The question really is if an attorney conducts an assessment, should they hire the third party to do the assessment? The answer is, in our opinion, always consult with an attorney. If you're going to do an assessment, you're likely going to identify a risk. So if you have the luxury of conducting an assessment, especially if you know you have exposure, you want to do it with an attorney next to you, so that if something were really, really bad were identified during the assessment, we can handle the reporting process appropriately without creating exposure for your client or for you as the client. How do you protect your client from third-party risk? It's no longer the case that if you gave a contractor access to your information and they were hacked, that it's not your responsibility. You have to understand these third-party risks. The Target hack, as most of us may know, was a result of an HVAC contractor who had access to the information to a server. And it just so happened that the IT team at Target didn't think it was necessary to turn on multi-factor authentication for the server that just had HVAC schematics on it. What they didn't realize is it was connected to the network, and a hacker got in, and luckily just happened to stumble upon 10 million credit card numbers. So understand the third-party risks, really identify what they are, get the consultation from a trusted advisor, make sure you've got audit and assessment tools in place so that you can limit the discovery process in the event of a litigation, and really limit the litigation risk, for a breach. Infrastructure is constantly evolving. You have to be able to evolve with the times. And if you don't have these tools in place today, you are no longer going to be considered to be using reasonable efforts to protect your data. Multi-factor authentication now is becoming a standard. Geofencing is not quite a standard, but it's becoming a norm. If none of your employees ever work outside of the 48 or the 52 or the 50 states here, Canada, Mexico, wherever it might be, and you're not disallowing China and Russia from accessing your network, it kind of makes you wonder why not. Data encryption, you have to encrypt your data just about every moment of every day. You have to be able to audit your environment, not just from the data integrity perspective, but your network as well. You need to be able to provide detailed audits for your network, your topology of the network, and defend yourself that you're using reasonable efforts to protect your infrastructure. Are you maintaining a change management system? Every time a patch is deployed, is someone monitoring that? Is someone testing it? Are they sure that the patch is clean? And sometimes the patches need a patch. Microsoft just recently rolled out a patch, and within 36 hours, they identified another vulnerability within that patch that actually opened up something else. So it's really, really important that you've got change management systems and that someone's constantly looking at your patch management. Again, I can't say it enough. By next year, we suspect that TetherView will use biometric control as another way to authenticate the session. It'll be built in. It'll be free. We won't charge you for that. That's just a sign of the times. So you have to be able to evolve and protect your environment as the threats are constantly evolving. So thank you guys for your time here. Sorry we ran a little bit over. If you have any questions, please contact Jamie Gray. But we're gonna answer a few questions here. So if you missed the polling question, we'll send it out to you after the webinar. If you go ahead and you need that, we see your question here. We'll get back to you on that. Don't worry about it. We'll answer those polling questions over the next couple of days if you missed it. So TetherView, what do? We move businesses to a private cloud. We work exclusively through our managed service providers. We build custom private solutions for each client. We include everything you need for the foundation for cybersecurity, compliance, and mobility. You no longer have to worry about backup, disaster recovery, or business continuity, and you can rest assured that we're constantly going to evolve our solution to mitigate risks and identify, the new compliance and regulatory issues out there. So one question here, just a couple questions coming in. So the question is from a managed service provider. This is really relevant to the law firms out there too. If there's a data breach, how can we ensure customers are not left liable? So if there is a data breach, it's a great question. If there's a data breach, what's important is that you report it immediately, as soon as it's identified. There's nothing worse than trying to, sweep it under the rug like Equifax did for a few weeks, which is going to come out here real soon, or has come out already. You need to identify it quickly. And then if you're storing your client's data, there might be the chance that you have to disclose to the client's client that there was a breach and provide that disclosure and the appropriate action. With the Equifax situation out there, what we suspect is the cost for these, right now the requirement by pretty much every regulator out there is they provide free monitoring for the clients that were breached. So that price is going down. It's important, again, that you report that quickly, and you want to mitigate the liability by showing that you've used reasonable effort. There's no way to mitigate the liability 100% because it's going to depend on the size of the client, the efforts that you took to protect the client data, and how quickly you responded and what you did to stop that threat. I don't see any other questions, but if you have anything, if you have any questions, any comments, email myself, email info@tetherview, or email Jamie. The webinar will be available and recorded on YouTube in the next few days. And again, if you need the CLE credits, please, we actually know who you are based on your registration. We'll be providing those to you within the next few days. So again, thanks for your time. Look forward to working with everybody, and hope you can join us on the next webinar. Have a great day.